is recording to the cloud. This is week 13 of Introduction or EdTech Foundations or Foundations of Instructional Technology, however you want to call it. You might get Bob Reeser's book. He calls this Instructional Design and Technology. And other departments around the country have renamed themselves Learning Design and Technology, some with commas, some without commas, some with one comma, some with two commas. We have not yet renamed or retitled ourselves, although that is my hope at some point we do that so people understand what we do. Week 13 is on ethics. And notice I skipped bringing anyone in on ethics because I knew all the students in this class are ethical. So I skipped right away to week 14. And that is jobs, jobs, jobs. That's all we hear about. Jobs, jobs, jobs. So I have created a portal of a jobs portal of jobs website of other portals. So if you go to my homepage, go into resources, you can click on that. You can also find programs in the field, and you can find journals, 3 portals that I've built and had them for a while now. So week 14, we're loaded with articles related to skills, competencies, and jobs in the field, as well as week 15. So Merve, my TA, one of the 2 TAs in this course, will present next week on our research on Twitter postings of jobs in the field, and whether or not she wants to come to and talk about the LinkedIn study next, she might do that. So officially, this is our last external guest of the semester, or guest, because Florence Martin, who's on several of these papers, has joined us. She was in my other class, 795 Dissertation Prep. She's joined us there as well on systematic reviews of the research from North Carolina at Charlotte, UNCC. And we have Albert Ritzhaupt coming to us from U of F, University of Florida, who I've heard they've just stolen away or hired somebody from Florida State. Marcy Driscoll told me that you hired someone, one of their best graduate students, apparently.
We didn't steal him. We welcomed him. So, but he was a graduate, so you know they typically don't hire their own. So, but we're very excited to have him because he represents the spirit of Val Shute, and she is somebody I tremendously look up to.
Okay, right. Val Shute, I need to bring her as a guest sometime. An expert in simulations, games, and AI that I was reading about in grad school. She must have been an early career person back then. I counted up 30 guests between my 2 classes this semester that I've brought in, and Albert and Florence will be the last ones, at least for this class. And so I hope that you have a chance to reflect on this one today and write some notes in your blogs. Those might be coming due. You might see due dates this week and next week and all sorts of things. I'm getting emails. Can I, take a little more time or a day or two? Believe me, the system in Canvas will stamp it as late, and I will ignore that. So if you want to take the 48-hour lateness or whatever I've got in there and add extra days to it, it's totally fine. I won't even blink or think about it. In fact, this is hereby said in the decree tonight, you don't even have to ask permission for a couple extra days. You just go ahead and take a couple extra days. You want to tell me, it's okay, because I am officially, like Washington, D.C., a swamp. The swamp has arrived. Oh my. So anyways, I attended part of AERA, the American Education Research Association meeting today, in and out of all that. It was kind of fun to go back. Been a member for 35 years, before many of you were born. I wanted to get to Albert. He's got more than 100? He's so young guy. 100 journal articles, book chapters, technical reports, and conference proceedings. He is amazing. I kind of ran into him before he got tenure and read his resume at that time. I just thought this guy's very prolific, and it's just continued. And not only does he produce within different journals, Journal of Computing in Higher Ed, Computers in Education, Journal of Educational Computer Research, Journal of Computers and Human Behavior, whatever. He's been in all of them. He's the editor of many journals too, or has been, or runs special issues of different journals. And and so, you know, you might run into his name in different ways. Maybe in the future, he'll have a special issue in a call and you'll be writing to him, whether or not your research fits the particular call that he's put out. The former associate editor of the Journal of Educational Computing Research, of which I used to be on editorial board for a long time, and I really liked that journal. And I have something coming out in it very shortly, in fact. That's a lot. That when I was in grad school, that was considered a top tier, one of the best journals in the field. Now there's so many journals. Oftentimes we don't hear about the Journal of Educational Computing Research, but Dr. Bob Seidman at New Hampshire has been in charge of that for a long decades and decades of time. He's great. And he's a consulting editor for EdTech Research and Development, a member of the Scientific Board of Computers and Human Behavior. And the list goes on and on and on. Past president of the Design Development SIG within AECT. So if you go to AECT, he's very involved in the Instructional Technology SIG, past chair of that one. Also within AERA, that one. So you know, he's recognized, I think, for some from 2007 to 2017, he was recognized as one of the most prolific scholars in this field. So, and as you can see, all the articles for this week, this is not what he specializes necessarily. He's a computer programmer and really interested in some things there. I mean, this issue of jobs and competencies and skills was something that's come, I think it's come later in his career, and he'll have to confirm that, but he's got many different interests, but software design and development being among those interests. Computer games and simulations, multimedia, the list can go on and on. And then I haven't even gotten to Florence yet. And Florence, if you want to talk about a dynamic duel here, these are two of the most prolific people in the field that are also among the youngest leaders in the field, in a field that needs young leaders. So what we have here today as celebrating week 13, actually of the last week of external people coming in, these are people that are going to be leading the field for the next decades. So you're going to hear from people today that you'll be at conferences 2 decades from now and say, I remember when I met you in Dr. Bonk's R511 class, the most important class in IST. In fact, the only class students need to take. Right, Merve? She didn't take this class. She took it in Turkey about 50 times over, so she didn't need it here in Indiana. Right, Merve?
Actually, yes, I took a different version in Turkey, but in Indiana, I just observed or sit in your classes.
That's right. You've been sitting in. That's right. And Mena also didn't need it when she came from China because she took it at Beijing Normal, right, Mena?
Yes, that's correct. I transferred some credits to IU.
Good thing. You could do other things. So Mena is at Wayne State now, as Florence knows, and maybe Albert knows. But Florence and I edited a special issue of ETR&D on systematic reviews of the research and meta-analyses that came out last summer. Albert, your camera is kind of tilted so that, yeah. Are you? Okay, great. Do you have a little extra light source in front of you or behind you possible? Well, he's checking for that. Oh, that's better. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So my students in here are been waiting to hear about this for weeks. I've been telling them about the importance of these last 2 weeks of the semester. And so Albert, Florence, please, Florence, at times when Albert's presenting, if you have something to add to it, please jump in. I'm going to be jumping in to talk about journals from time to time that Albert's going to run through. I've seen his talk, and I think I've shared it. Maybe I haven't. If I haven't, it's in Dropbox. So, and if you want to get it, and I'm recording it, and I'll make a YouTube private video of this afterwards. So, Albert, you want to take off with this? Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for that really in-depth introduction. I will try to live up to your expectations here. Thank you all for inviting me. I've been active in the field for about 15 years now, and I like many of you have a lot of interests. I want to know about everything. I want to know what works. I want to try this. I want to try that. That's pretty normal for a doc student, I think, and that's a good sign, I think, too, because it shows that you really are committed to a variety of ideas and that you're willing to try new things and whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share, but I want to qualify the talk by saying a few things. First thing, to both Kurt and Florence, please feel free to chime in when and where appropriate, when I stumble on my own words and whatnot. And then for all the students in the room, please ask questions along the way. I've budgeted 2 hours. In fact, I have nothing else to do. ARA is over. So I'll stay as long as I don't bore you, right? So just feel free to interrupt, okay? Okay, I just want to confirm, can you guys see my screen? Okay, beautiful. Okay, so the title of the general talk that I'm going to give is Studying Competencies of Educational Technology Professionals. So my name is Albert Ritzhaupt, and I put like a little bio slide in here. I go by Albert. If you see me at ACT or AERA or anything like that, just call me Albert. That's how I roll. So a little bit about me in terms of my academic journey. I started off in computer science. So my intentions were to become a very skilled software developer, maybe work in industry or whatever. And that's what I was going to do. So then I started doing that after I got my bachelor's. I started working as a contractor for Blue Cross Blue Shield Florida. And meanwhile, while I was there, everybody was all talking business and you had to know about this and return on investment and this and that. So I quickly discovered that I needed to immerse myself a little bit more in the business side of things rather than just the technical side. So I pursued a Master of Business Administration. Now, this was a critical point for me because at this stage, I actually started adjuncting at a community college and at University of North Florida in computer science. I was teaching, intro level programming, operating systems, some software development, discrete mathematics, stuff like that. By the time I finished my MBA and had worked for a few years in industry, I was more interested in writing software programs and testing out ideas of what would work for education with my students than I was working as a Dilbert in a cubicle, right? So that was important because that marked the decision point for me to pursue a doctoral program. Now, I have to be completely honest, I did not know anything about the field of instructional technology, educational technology, whatever we're called. I mean, it drives me crazy that nobody can agree on what to call us, but whatever. The point I'm trying to make is I didn't know this existed. So I actually started talking to folks. I was considering doing a computer science degree and focusing on educational issues, or some of you might be familiar with the discipline of information systems, which is out of business. I considered that to do educational issues. I didn't know what I was going to do. But then I stumbled upon this discipline by Kathy Kavanaugh. I don't know if you know that, Kurt, but Kathy Kavanaugh was at UNF at the time, and she's like, yeah, there's a field for that. And she directed me to her alma mater, which was USF. And at the time, there was a professor there by the name of Ann Barron, who's since retired. And she's, made her fair mark in the field and done a lot of stuff. And so I decided to work with her. So most of my experiences then, aside from that, 2.5-year stint in industry, are in educational software development, higher ed, consulting, and research and evaluation work. I identify myself as a designer. I'm interested in software design, in multimedia design, in instrument design, in research design, in anything that has to do with making complex decisions and and putting things together that are usable, functional, valid, reliable, whatever. That's the type of stuff that excites me, particularly from a methodological standpoint. So like many of you, I have a lot of competing interests, right? So it took me actually a good amount of time to really identify what I was doing with my time, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but you at the assistant professor stage, you're working so hard and doing all these research projects. And, at that stage, you're a little bit more opportunistic too. You're doing stuff that, sounds really exciting and you just want to get involved and you do it. But then I started to realize there was a pattern to what I was doing and the projects that I was choosing to engage in. And they broadly fell into these 4 categories that I've listed here. One has to do with what I'd label as theory-inspired technology-enhanced learning environments. I'm interested in everything from design to evaluation and more emerging topics related to learning analytics and evidence-centered design and stuff like that. I am very interested in formal educational settings, looking at uses and hindrances and facilitators of that environment. That's probably what I'm known for the most, and probably what got me the role as editor-in-chief of JRTE. Then one of the key drivers that has been part of my grant work and some of my academic program work is my interest in computer science education. Just to give you an example, I don't know if you know this, some of you have probably taken programming courses or something like that, but the retention rates in an introduction, what they call CS1 programming course, is like about 40%, and it's been stable there for about 10 years, so we've dumped all this money in that space and we still haven't moved the needle. It's almost a real crisis. But that is an area that I'm very passionate about and continue to work in, and I work with teachers and stuff like that. And then this area of professional competencies, which is the focus of this talk, which was an area that I dabbled a little bit in before I got to UNCW, which was my first tenure track job. Yeah, so let me go ahead and move forward. Now, why study competencies and what are they, right? So,
say, Albert, they might not know a few of these acronyms. So University of South Florida was where he got us, so USF.
Okay.
And then you mentioned UNF, which is North Florida in Jacksonville, is that right?
That is correct.
And now UNCW would mean UNC Wilmington.
Right.
And that's also where Florence worked.
Right. That's where we intersected and our journey began. So, she was on the hiring committee. She actually waited at the airport for me for hours because my flight got delayed. I still remember that night vividly. So, yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's good. That's good.
Okay. So how did all this start? Florence and I, she was a year out ahead of me, in a tenure track job anyway. And we were both like, these newly minted assistant profs, and we're in a situation where we want actually to teach very well. I hate to say it, but nowadays, depending on what institutions you go to, you don't always get, the best situation. I hate to say it, especially in some R1s now, but we took teaching very seriously. So we wanted to know, well, what are we supposed to teach in our courses, and how do we know that? What do employers need from our graduates? What competencies are most desired, and how did that align to our curriculum? What resources do we need? What technologies and tools do we need to be teaching? How does that create to standards and competencies? And what professional associations are responsible for governing this set of decision-making for all of us, right? So these are just some questions as to why we see the significance of this work in competencies for our field. So that's where it all started, with Florence and I asking that question. And that leads to this first article that I use as a starting point. Florence and I, she was teaching the generic multimedia development course. I was teaching the programming and game development course. And we're like, well, what multimedia tools do we teach? What topics do we cover? How should we structure it? What type of assignment should we give? Stuff like that. So our first foray into this was this article in JEMH, which is an AACE journal. And it was focused on multimedia competencies for folks in our field. And we did a survey and reported only descriptively. And we did a job announcement analysis where we coded the presence or absence of knowledge, skill, and ability statements that we identified across these journal articles and the job announcements themselves. So that was the start. And ever since then, Florence and I have been pushing this agenda forward, more, and we're excited about it. It still informs what we do. So the second article to come out from—
Albert, can we go back just a second? Sorry. So when he said AACE, it's the Association for the Advancement of Computing in Education, which is run by the director is Gary Marks, a good friend of mine. I'm on various boards of his conferences. So there's 4 main conferences for AACE, at least 3 that you should keep in mind. One is called SITE, S-I-T-E, for teacher education, and information technology and education, something like that. And it just had that conference 2 weeks ago, because we were the final keynote for that. The second one, I normally don't go to that one, but once in a while. Second one's called eLearn, which is typically in the fall, and it rotates between Canada and the US. It's a good conference, very good. I'm biased because I used to run the board. And the third one is called EdMedia, which is probably the best of the 3. And often it's going to be permanently in Europe now, and it's been in the Netherlands and Amsterdam for the last couple of years when we didn't have COVID. But this is one of their flagship journals, and I used to be on the board for this one. It's a good journal. There's a couple. They have a lot of journals, and some are better than others. I'd say this is one of the better ones, a lot of journals tend to be online learning journals nowadays, and we don't have a lot of these that just relate to hypermedia, multimedia anymore. And then when I started as a grad student, it was all about hypermedia and multimedia. That was it, And now everything's moved to, distance education and AI and whatever else. And so it's good to have this. So keep this journal in mind. And I'm curious, you didn't mention any of the findings. Is there anything from the study that's important that you want to, either you or Florence want to mention?
Well, I was going to actually cover that with the next one. So just keep in mind the methodology. We did a job announcement analysis where we had coded the absence or presence of a specific knowledge, skill, or ability statement. And then we administered a survey to professionals in the field who responded using an importance scale about those knowledge, skill, and ability statements. This paper just summarized the descriptives, if you will, for those data. So descriptive statistics, response frequencies, and means of the ordinal responses.
And I think that people can just type in aace.org, Merve or Charan, you put the in the chat window, go and search. They can get everything from that one link. They have a library, this gigantic library of articles that all the proceedings from every conference for the last 30 years. It's huge. And the conferences info that they run. AAC is a huge organization, but a very friendly one if you go to their conferences. And so, I recommend it. There are better conferences, I would say, like AERA, for instance, in terms of quality, but it's good.
So
Sorry,
I would just, go ahead.
Just 1 minute before you move forward. So this study was done a decade ago. So if you're reading it, just keep the timeline in mind, because in the 10 years, in the last 10 years, the field has definitely moved forward in terms of multimedia competencies. So the study that Albert is presenting is more new. I think the data was from like 2019. So it published in 2020. So this was a decade old. So just keep that date in mind when you read it.
Yeah, and the other thing to say there is that's part of the reason why Florence and I are so busy with this stuff, because periodically you have to go back and double check. I mean, think about it this way. Some of you may not even realize it because it's been this way for a few years now, but Adobe products were straight up client-based standalone applications that you put on your machine. They weren't cloud-based like they are now. All this has changed. I mean, back in Florence and I's day, it was Flash or Authorware even before that, So this stuff changes and it needs to be done periodically, which is part of, you know, the drive for it. So this second study, which was published in ETR&D, and I'm sure Kurt can elaborate on ETR&D as a journal, but this one used the same data set that we had collected from that 2010 piece. And what it did was we performed an exploratory factor analysis on each one of the domains of knowledge, skill, and ability, because we had, you know, 80 knowledge statements or something like that or whatever. So what exploratory factor analysis did for us was it allowed us, it's a data reduction method. It allowed us to collapse the list of, you know, 100 some competencies into kind of these meaningful chunks or labels, which would subsequently be used as the broader, if you will, competency statements that we would use, you know, if we were to write statements out. So this piece was published in 2014. You know, I'm not sure what Kurt will say about ETR&D, but one thing you'll probably want to keep in mind, they like to review. So they'll iron out every reviewer comment like through like 3 stages of revision before you actually get published. Hence the 2014 from 2010 dates, right? So Kurt, did you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, a couple of things. Last Monday in my other class, we had 4 people present, and one of them was a former student named Dabe Lee, who's at Kennesaw State now. She has 3 articles in press for 2021 in this journal already, like in the first 3 months, and we all got down on our knees and praised her. And one went through, I think, 11 reviews before it got accepted. So she has extreme patience to handle the amount of reviews that ETR&D tends to get. British Journal of EdTech and this journal tend to have a lot of reviews. Unless you just hit it right. There are some things you can, sometimes it's very smooth sailing, but for the most part, you know, the number of reviewers and reviews dictate you have to a lot of revisions. ETR is top notch. It's not open access, but if you publish in it, like we did recently, Florence and I, we asked for certain articles to be open access, and they made them open access. They made our intro and ending, and naturally they're the ones that got downloaded the most and read the most. But you know, it's a top journal for a long time. And it was 25 years for me between my first publication in it and my one last year in it. So for me, it's not a frequent one because I came from the EdPsych field. So it wasn't one that, but in the IST field, people tend to try and publish in it frequently. So Florence, you want to mention something about leading the special issue for this journal? Anything you want to mention about ETR&D?
I think the special issue experience was much more smoother, and we didn't do more than 2 rounds of reviews. We received 44 proposals, out of which we invited 20, and then we ended up publishing 14. So when we invited them, we tried our best to give them the support to turn it into a high quality publication. So in addition to, like, you know, the reviewer feedback, the 3 editors, Kurt, me, and Vanessa, took the time to provide feedback. And I think mostly, right, even out of the 20, not all of them came in. So I think it was a much easier experience. And we have an open access introductory article, if any of you want to take the time to read it, which is, I think, is a good piece. But I agree. I hear that they take a long time. So I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, and the closing was written by Tom Reeves and someone named Lin at University of North Texas, and it was rated the #1 open access article of 2020 by some select committee. So it was important that this was open access. The preface was by David Wiley and myself, so I can easily send you 3 pieces: the intro, the closing, and the preface. If you write me a special note on the side, I could probably send you the whole thing if you don't tell anyone or share it with anyone else, because I have tenure and I can do things that others can't. No, this is being recorded and I can cut that part out. No. So Albert, you want to continue? So Albert's going to be giving us data. He's giving us the introduction of what the data, where the data has been published in first.
Yeah, so, you know, just so you all know my perspective, I'm very much born from open software movement. I believe in open knowledge. One day we will get to a point where we can pull down these paywalls. But right now they are providing a value add service. We can't deny that. So we just got to figure out a different business model, and I hope we get there sooner than later. So the next thing that I want to draw your attention to is now a magazine that is no longer in operation. It was only an in-print magazine. Now all the archives are available on JSTOR. It was edited by this really nice guy who has just made such a profound impact in the field by doing this work over the years. I had published in this journal twice, and both times, I mean, you want to talk about an active editor. I mean, this is an editor review journal. It's not peer reviewed, but he was just a unique commodity and a very nice guy. So anyway, what we started noticing, Florence and I and subsequent students that I started exploring these topics with, is that the vast majority of these job announcements that we were trying to look at to get information from only require a bachelor's degree for entry into the profession. Now, you know, there's a million ways a person can enter, you know, a field. It's not like you have to have a degree in computer science to be a Java programmer. You know, I mean, there's 1,000 ways you could get there, but reality is, in the United States, at least, most of our academic programs at this level are at the graduate level. We can't deny that. So this was the preface into my academic work at my home institution of UF to offer a bachelor's degree program, which I'm gonna make note of after I get through all these articles. So the moral of the story is, you know, organizations don't care necessarily whether you have a bachelor's or master's. They typically want at least a bachelor's nowadays for professional associations and stuff like that. But you know, we need to get into the undergrad market. And you know, just to give you a heads up about the coursework that I'll go over later, this degree program is very popular now at UF. We have 300 majors, and we have about 100 in our specialization. So big thing, big deal. And this piece in particular did some survey work with the folks, but also focused more explicitly on an architecture for what this degree program would look like. Ultimately, I was able to get the full architecture approved because of competing interests and turf wars and all that stuff. But I got a specialization through, and I was very proud of that.
So I will comment on this journal if it's okay. So Larry Lipsick is the name of the editor that Albert was alluding to. And Larry,
sorry, I didn't mention his name.
Yeah, Larry Lipsick. And they didn't have a website, and he doesn't have like a homepage or anything. He wasn't big on the web, and he hadn't made it, all the articles were not digital. And for the last few years of this journal, I was on the editorial board, and I did various book reviews and recruited and other things for Larry. He'd call me on the phone every once in a while and say, I have this idea, you know. He was very hands-on, and you'd see him at the ERA conference in the front row. And if he liked the symposium, or he'd give his business cards to everybody and say, "Why don't you write for the next issue?" So this was almost this was a magazine that was almost like a journal. It was good, high quality, yet it wasn't peer reviewed typically. For people in 511 for this class, even though this journal no longer exists, there may be a journal that comes out that takes its place. People are talking about creating something like this journal now. And you should at least be aware that this journal did exist. And the articles, as Albert pointed out, are not free. They have been scanned in now, and they're available in JSTOR, which is an organization that scans and makes articles available. Blah, blah, blah. Is that at MIT? JSTOR is MIT? Or the servers at MIT?
I don't know that. I have no idea.
Okay. So anyways, we can go on and talk about where these are made open access. But when he died, there was a special issue on him that Tom Rees, my colleague, ran, and I wrote for his obituary, I wrote a piece, and his brother liked what I wrote so much, he called me and said he wanted to send me every issue of EdTech magazine for the last 60 years, since 1964, and the audio tapes. He first started doing interviews in audio interviews in the 60s. In my office, he sent all this stuff. I really didn't want it. He sent the box boxes. So these boxes were in my office for a couple of years, and I finally had donated them to ACT, which headquarters are in Bloomington. But by that time, JSTOR had scanned them in. So yeah, I'm very familiar with this journal too, Albert. And yeah, it's a little side story. I don't know if Maynard remembers seeing the boxes in my office, or Merve 5 years ago or whatever it was, or 4 years ago.
And my first publication was in this journal too, Educational Technology. So it's a great place as a doc student to publish those days. And that was interesting. Actually, I didn't even make that connection, Albert, didn't think about it. So I wrote that piece with Dr. James Klein, who was my advisor at Arizona State. And we wrote a piece on teaching research to educational technology students and what do we teach in these courses. So we did like a syllabi analysis. So again, with the intention of, like what competencies do we cover? So that was the same study that was published in this. And I have a scanned copy of the article because it was not digitized.
So they would do stuff in EdTech magazine, the history of the ADDIE model. And you'd have Mike Melendo do a historical review of the archives and just read everything you can. And they post stuff like that. It was really interesting stuff that normally wouldn't be in journal articles. What's kind of taken its place is Tech Trends is sort of like this, but not quite. Tech Trends is a higher level and peer reviewed and all that, but something else may come about to take its place. What's happening is free books are coming about with Rick West and other people creating things. Yeah.
Just to point it out, that is Royce Kimmons that built that platform, though. I give him great kudos for his work on that platform. I think that's had a more profound influence than any other recent innovation that we've had. So yeah, Royce Kimmons built that.
Repeat what he built and where is Royce Kimmons at? They might not know him. What
Royce
university?
Kimmons is at BYU with Rick West, but Royce was the software developer. He's an assistant prof and he goes up to associate this year, but he was the one that was the mind and software and talent behind that website.
Behind the free book website. Oh,
yeah, EdTech books.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for telling us, yeah.
No problem, no problem. Okay, so leading forward, like I said, we needed to do this notion of periodic updates, right? So in this particular study, we had mined 400 job announcements. Now, just to make a point, I think when Florence and I did it, we did it over like maybe a 3-month period and maybe have.
Did we lose him?
Usually if you wait.
Find 1,000 job announcements.
Oh, Albert, you're going to have to repeat that because you froze for 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. The point that I was trying to make is that this is a situation where you have to do periodic updates, right? So I already said that, but just to make an anecdotal evidence claim here, when Florence and I started with this, it was maybe 200 job announcements that we were able to collect over like a 2-3 month period. This study found 400, and in our most recent study, where we only had a window of a single month, we extracted more than 1,000. So to me, I get it, it's anecdotal, I don't have control groups, all that type of notion, but our field is growing. And I think COVID had something to do with that too in more recent history, at least showing the value added, particularly in higher ed. So that's a good thing. This study extended our work, and those knowledge, skill, and ability statements are really the essence of what Florence and I have been working on with this line of work, at least. And what we did was we refreshed those knowledge, skill, and ability statements and coded across 400 job announcements. This was an entirely descriptive study. We published it in JETS, which is a smaller boutique EdTech journal, originally published by the same publisher that did JCR, which I used to edit. It was published originally by Baywood, but now it's been acquired by Sage. Not as competitive as like an ETR&D or something like that, but it's still a solid venue, and it's run by people out of that program at, oh my God, what's the name of the university? Stony Brook, their information and technology society type program. So that's what this work was. And this one led into the next one. Kurt, did you want to say anything about this journal? Or did
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So that led into this next one that was done by my colleague Swapna Kumar, who was originally going to come, but she had a conflict. What we had clearly noted was that the vast majority of the positions that were in higher education were for IDs or comparable titles like instructional coordinator that was basically doing the same thing. But what we discovered in conversations just with folks, you know, with that title is that they're doing things dramatically differently from institution to institution. So what we decided to do was get at more of the detailed information about what they're actually doing. And we intentionally gathered interview data. We interviewed, I think, 8 or 10 or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. Instructional designers in higher ed at community colleges, for-profits, big research universities, all the above, to try and understand. And what we learned is that, you know, you can even be working at the same institution like UF and have the same title, but be doing dramatically different things within your context. So very much a situational thing. And it kind of reminds me, and Kurt could probably relate to this too. Sorry if you hear my dog making breathing noises in the background. Much like a software engineer or software designer, whatever you want to label them, you could have that title and be doing something completely different from organization to organization, or even within the same organization. That's a reality that we face in the profession of software. That is very much true, apparently, for what we're dealing with in ID. To give an example, an ID maybe at a community college might be running workshops, like kind of like a Center for Teaching Excellence, and doing like an info newsletter, and also helping with online course design, consultation. Whereas in a university, in an online production center, those people are just in the LMS all the time and building course shells, recording animations, and, you know, all that type of stuff. So that was pretty important to us. And that led actually to this second piece. Well, I'll go back. I'll go back in a second. This second piece was kind of a joke about the fact that we don't know what these people are doing, right? So there was a piece written by folks about, you know, 2 decades ago called "What Do Instructional Designers Really Do?" And we decided to label this piece, "What do instructional designers in higher education really do?" Because we didn't know, you know, and it was so different from place to place. So just to point out, PIQ is the flagship research journal of ISPI. Sorry, I'm getting an Amber Alert. ISPI, which is the International Society for Performance Improvement. It's kind of like the EdTech-ish sister organization that focuses more on behavioral engineering and stuff like that, and how it influences performance improvement and stuff like that. Really good business models and stuff like that that they work with. They're not as influential perhaps as like an ETR&D or whatever, but they do good stuff. So that's PIQ. And then,
Albert, can I make a comment on PIQ?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think ISPI, which is the organization that runs it, used to have a different, it had the same acronym, but it had a different name behind it. It was more behaviorally based. It was corporate training. So the weeks that we had Dr. Carol Watson and Dr. Youngju Cho, and then Justin Whiting and Seth Martinez, former IST student, those weeks on human performance technology were aligned with this particular journal, in effect, PIQ. So the people in the corporate training side and the human performance technology side will be publishing PIQ. And then there's also performance improvement review, I think. So there are 2 journals, one's a monthly and one's a quarterly. This is the more prestigious quarterly one and harder to get. Performance improvement review, I think, is easier to get in. And a lot of IST professors here at Indiana were involved in that in the past. We don't have corporate trainers as much now. We don't have any left, but this journal was near and dear to their hearts. And that's why this class is a couple of weeks related to that, just as an aside.
So Albert just stepped aside to go to the restroom for a minute. So just one thing I'd like to add, and he's going to show you there's at least another 4 or 5 articles. We are seeing so many on studies on instructional design and some at the bachelor's level. So one angle that now I am taking, and both of us are also thinking ahead to do, is the one I have done recently is looking at competencies for chief learning officers. So once you gain the experience, what is your next step? And then it's not published yet, but I'm analyzing the data, interviewed 12 CLOs, and Albert and I have also been talking about talking to like directors of centers for teaching and learning. So I think, these different positions, you're required to have different competencies. So hopefully for those who are aspiring to be in those positions, it gives them an idea of what to work towards, because we're preparing all these doctoral students, right? So some of them already are instructional designers. So what is the next step for them? So maybe that'll help too.
Yeah, there is a journal or a magazine called Chief Learning Officer that is free online. And I used to be on the board, well, I used to write for it. I haven't gotten it lately. I wonder if it still exists. But the last few months, I haven't heard anything from it's called CLO, Chief Learning Officer, and it's very good. So people like Jeff might want to check out CLO, and Merve might want to look for the website and put it in the chat window. It's short articles. They often have those, skill, kind of little short research articles, but interviewing people who are dynamic in the field of corporate training every month, new trends and whatnot. I like it, even though I'm more on the higher ed side. I learn a lot from it. It's worth having. And there used to be a print. You used to be able to get the print free and the digital free. And you could, I think they still will send you the print, but Merve, can you check if there's a current, what's the most current issue too, Merve, when you check? Thank you.
So, okay, thank you. I had to use the restroom really bad. Okay, so the second piece, just to connect with this journal thing that we're doing here, this is also an AACE journal, and it aligns with those conferences that Kurt had mentioned. One of them is eLearn, and this is like their e-learning journal.
Yep.
This one has gone through a series of name changes over the years. It used to be called like WebNet or something, and like it was telecommunications and education or something. But it's maintained its new word of e-learning for the last few years at least. Okay, so this piece here was complementary to that 2015 piece, using the same knowledge, skills, and ability statements, but we had surveyed a much wider and diverse audience of professionals in the domain of ed tech, so IDs, managers, whatever. So we again replicated the same type of analyses using EFAs to validate the competencies. And if I recall, in this one, we also did, some Manova work too, just to look for, group differences on key outcome indicators. This one was also published with Florence and I's colleague at UNCW. He's still there. His name's Ray Pastor. Nice guy. So, this was published in Journal of Computing in Higher Ed. Journal of Computing in Higher Ed actually represents my first journal in the field of ed tech. I had published in CS Ed journals before, but Journal of Computing in Higher Ed used to be run by a lady named Carol McKnight, and it was a print journal. And she was a very, again, like a Larry, a very active, engaged editor, would, I hate to say it, and I don't know how you feel about this, Kurt, but this was that comment I made in the email to you. Editors make a big difference. A lot of these editors just kind of say, here's your feedback, fix it, and it's just like, well, what happens if there's conflicts? What happens if there's this? And I, as an editor, also, fall victim to that sometimes, but, when I'm active on email and I answer their questions, and further, I usually try to provide a few sentences to characterize the review to them on the initial reviews. So, editorial wise, I think the editor plays a big role. And, that notion of ironing out every detail like ETR&D does, I kind of philosophically align more with how like Dr. Sai runs Computers in Ed, to the extent that if it goes past a second, third review, then something's wrong. It just didn't work right. So I try not to iron out more than a second or third review max. So this piece though, you'll notice the word multimedia is no longer included in this one. We did not look at just multimedia competencies here. We broadened that scope and refreshed that scope of knowledge, skill, and ability statements to be inclusive of all things we do. So that was the big contribution here, and good journal again as well.
Yeah, I will mention in the late 90s, I had a piece published in there with Vanessa Denon at Florida State, and we had very good luck with this particular journal. And recently, I had one that sat in the queue for a long time before coming out because they got overloaded with too many journals, and the editor was in the midst of moving from Virginia to New Mexico. And so it took over, it came out online, and it took over a year to come out in print. And so it was a little frustrating, and my colleague wanted to send another one to it this time. And lo and behold, they've caught up. The queue has changed. It's totally changed. So from one year ago, we had such a poor experience, a year and a half ago. And now most recently, within the last couple of weeks, we had a great experience. So sometimes you never know. Albert, looks like you had.
Yeah, Florence knows why I'm smiling. I don't mean to dump on this editor, and I'm not going to use the editor's name, but we had a piece that got locked up for 6 months and didn't even get sent out for review, and then rejected with a sentence, and that is unacceptable. So I was very frustrated about that. So, okay, so moving forward, one of the points and themes that I'm trying to make here, and that I think is evident from Florence and I's work, is that we're serious about our teaching and we value it, right? So we want to be better teachers, and we want to know what to teach, how to teach it, when to teach it, all that stuff. This work, which doesn't carry the label of competency or anything like that, was a piece that we authored in Internet and Higher Education. And I think Vanessa's yours, right? She was your student, right? Kurt? Okay. Vanessa, she was your graduate, right?
Vanessa Denon?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's the editor of this. Yeah, she's the editor of this journal,
which is why I was bringing it up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
By the way, this is a flagship journal now in our field. Has a very high impact factor.
Very high impact factor. Really high.
She's done a very good job with it.
So not only does she do a good job, the journal, I don't think it's Emerald, they have figured out how to get it to be a big impact. They've got a way that they've.
This is actually an Elsevier journal, if I'm not mistaken.
Elsevier, that's right, Elsevier.
Yeah. But it's a great journal, hands down. And Vanessa's really, I attribute a lot of that to her quality leadership there.
Well, and Mana's here, one of her first publications as a grad student was this journal 2-3 years ago in 2018. It already has 100 references or citations on that. So, she had it's
well read. Did you know the original editors of this journal actually came from an institution that's often perceived as inferior in the world of the academy?
Yeah, Nova Southeastern.
The editors came out of Nova Southeastern, and I get a laugh out of it because for years I would listen to people dump on that institution, and what are we all doing now? We're trying to be like them. That is the reality of it. So, I get a laugh out of that. But the point that I wanted to make with this one is that when you get out in the academy and an assistant prof and all that, you're going to have a lot of competing forces and interests and whatever, and you got to balance it all. Well, this is a situation where Florence and I are kind of able to double dip in teaching and in research, such that we're learning how to be better teachers and what to teach. But at the same time, we're making a real contribution to our field and the discourse about these topics. So I just wanted to point that out that, research, teaching, service, they're not entirely mutually exclusive. You can find ways to kind of get those ideas to align if you're careful.
I want to make a comment on this because you had 2 pieces like this one. And
I had 3
pieces. And I think this is ingenious to look at award-winning faculty online teaching prices is ingenious. So you know, that data is available, and that's a limited sample. It's a, you know, and they very valuable findings. I mean, people at the University of Colorado Denver did something similar a few years ago, maybe 8 to 10 years ago. But I thought that was fascinating too. But you know, this is probably one of the top, in terms of topic and timing. I would say it's, for me, of the things, all the things I read, this would be one of the things I would list as being one, maybe a top 10 impactful for the field. You know, and so I highly recommend reading this to everyone.
Thank you, Kurt. You know, I'll add a few things to say to it. I helped write like the conceptual orientation and draft the interview questions for this one. And then Swapna contributed very heavily with coding and teaching us qualitative, and you know, we all contributed in different ways on this one. But what I'll say is, you know, on my Google Scholar page, this one's already on the front page and was just published in 2019. So you know, it's getting attention out there and that it actually had an impact. So we're proud of that.
Similar to this is a study by Timothy Hugh, who looked at the 10 most popular MOOCs and then they did a machine analysis of what the comments were made and what made those, what were the things people talked about that made them the most popular ones, which you can then train faculty to become better teachers. It's the same thing here. You're doing research on what makes people highly engaging and productive and award-winning. It's research on teaching, and you can in turn turn that into a practical curriculum training program or programs. And so, I mean, geez, this is what we should be doing, because this is not just going to help the field of instructional design. This would help every field. I mean, every single field during COVID is moving to online learning. So the impact is not just within, it's the impacts throughout. And so here, if our discipline needs to pay attention to these kinds of things, and we could be helping governments design new policies, I mean, and funding streams and all sorts of things. I'm just saying.
So the other two articles, Kurt, that you mentioned, they are both published in the Online Learning Journal, if anybody is interested, which is again an open access journal, and I think they're doing pretty well. So one of those articles actually has roles and competencies in the title. So we specifically did look at online instructor roles and competencies.
Florence, can you put the citations in the chat window?
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, just an example of how this stuff can be used for making you a more reflective and proficient educator as well. So this piece was one of our more recent ones. This is on project management. Some of you may know I'm a PMP. I worked during that industry period. I worked as a project manager in software development, which is why I got the MBA and all that stuff. What we were interested in is the intersection of project management and our domain. So in this case, we had interviewed folks who worked in higher education in ed tech or instructional design, wherever you want to label us, doing project management work, usually managing a team of, you know, subject matter experts and IDs and graphic designers, software developers, LMS admins, whatever. So we gathered that data similar to the other project with interview in this case, and just tried to summarize it. This journal, JADE, is an AECT sponsored journal. It stands for the Journal of Applied Instructional Design. I was a little worried about it for a while because back to that editor type situation making a big difference. But the person who has taken it over is actually at UGA, Jill Stefaniak. She's very active with the journal and very active with her authors now. So I think they fixed it. And I'm very proud to have this piece in there. Also, open access. Okay, so this is the most recent piece. We published it in a journal that was more business oriented. I mean, I don't even remember why we did that, Florence. I mean, this could have gone anywhere in our field, but like we wanted to touch the business side more in this case, and we thought this was an appropriate venue to do such. So this is the paper that I'm going to push down on a little bit and go into depth and talk about method and talk about other considerations that might be of interest to you. And this is our most recent work. So Kurt, let me ask a question. Do you want to do like a 10-minute break for everybody? Or a 5-minute break? I don't know if anybody wants it. I mean, I'll keep going. I don't care. But usually in sync sessions, I give like a few minutes in between.
You know, we could put a pause button on. I've seen your slides. I don't think you don't have a lot of stuff left. So I mean, but you know, what do you guys think here? Merve, you think we should take a couple-minute quick break for everybody or not?
Sure, I think, yeah, it's a great idea.
So Albert, what do you have on the next slide? Okay, so you're getting, okay.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well, how about we take a 5-minute break just to get bathroom, stretch your legs and all that after this last slide here. I forgot that I had this slide here. I had indicated earlier that one of the things that I did was start a new academic program at my home institution. So very proud to have assembled and got approved all of these courses during my tenure as program coordinator of EdTech. And we successfully launched now the most popular specialization in this new Bachelor's of Educational Sciences degree. It's actually a Bachelor of Arts in Educational Sciences, which just confused the hell out of me because it's like, is it a Bachelor of Arts or Science or what? But, you know, anyway, these are the courses, and you can get an idea of what we're covering in these courses just by looking at them. But I'm proud that we got these courses approved because this is a generic degree that has a concentration, if you will. I don't know if any of you have dealt with curriculum in hot areas like, you know, elementary ed or something like that. You can have like serious turf wars in those cases. That's kind of what we went through with this, but not as bad. It wasn't as volatile. So this also shows you how Florence and I have used what we've learned to manifest something that would be of value to the community and to our institutions.
So, and I want to just add one thing before you guys go on break, because I think I'm not going to be able to come back after the break. I have got to get the kids to bed. So both Albert and I are involved with Pmp, the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Instruction. For those of you who may not have heard about the organization. So they are primarily responsible for creating competencies, or at least that's their major agenda. And they have competency sets for instructional designers, for instructors, for training managers. So I serve on the board, and Albert is affiliated as an Pmp scholar. So, and it's been interesting working with them too, because they're trying to think through, so what competencies do L&D professionals need, and how do we move the field forward? You know, should we be looking at it by roles, or should we collapse it? Or so that's a conversation we are having right now. So I just wanted to share that before I take off. But thank you, Albert, for inviting me. I was here to just listen, you know.
I felt like it would be, you know, immoral to like talk about this stuff and for you not at least to have a presence, you know. So I'm so glad that you were able to come for the time that you did. I'll try to do justice to this newest study that we just published.
I'm sure you will. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kurt.
Well, okay. Before we take a break here, I want to thank you for popping in here. And just to clarify, then this is a new program University of Florida is establishing, and University of Florida is hiring many people. So it is a place that hopes to be the top ed tech related program or one of them in the entire country. And they have a huge initiative hiring upwards of 6, 7, or 8 people over a span of a few years. You want to talk about that before we go to break?
We have literally quadrupled effective fall 2021 since I got there. So when we started, it was Kara, Pasha, myself, and Swapna. Now we have like 16 people that are affiliated in some way or another with our program.
Yeah, when I popped in there in 2013, that was all. When you guys took me to dinner, that's all you guys had at the time.
That's it. you know, so it's a different space now. It really is. So, but we're very proud of our work. And, you know, we take online education pretty seriously at our institution. We've been rated first or second according to US News World Report, which I don't take very seriously, by the way. But, you know, the academic advisors and administrators seem to think that means everything. So I just play along with it and get happy when we get ranked well. So.
Yeah, yeah, you were tied with us once, I think, maybe, and yeah, it was neck and neck, and same thing here. You know, they promoted, but there's lots of better things that they could be looking at.
Okay, so
let's take a 5-minute here.
So it is right now 8:09. So why don't we come back at 8:15 and then I'll finish up?
Yep, I'll pull them recording. Okay, Albert, what is PMP? What is EFAs? And I know what MANOVA is, but you might want to explain it. Don't explain too much, but just.
No, I won't go into
PMP,
central, all that stuff. Yeah. Okay, so first one, PMP stands for Project Management Professional. And if you look up, you know, what certifications actually matter in the world of business, PMP would certainly be one of them. It stands for the knowledge, skills, and dispositions, if you will, of people who have proven themselves to be effective in following systematic procedures to carry out project work.
Okay, I thought PMP was a computer programming language.
No, PMP is Project Management Professional, and it's put out by PMI, which is the Project Management Institute. It's very much, I got to admit, it's very much straight up waterfall, or the original standards. They've been quick to adopt agile methods, but the principles are largely based on more of a waterfall approach. But when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar projects that have like thousands of sub-projects, you kind of need a waterfall approach. It's not like you can just do a scrum of that, right? So, and then,
so I was thinking of PHP, as Brian pointed out here, Brian in Louisville.
Pre-hypertext processor or personal home pages, depending.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's EFA?
Okay. EFA stands for Exploratory Factor Analysis, and EFA, to give a quick description of it, it's a data reduction technique. So say you have a survey with 30 items. Well, you know, do all 30 of those items really need to be individually analyzed and explained or whatever? Or is there a larger latent construct that is being measured by a set of those items that kind of cluster together? So EFA is a data reduction method that uses linear algebra to optimize the mathematics of how those items hang together based on like these things called pattern coefficients. And, you know, it's kind of like correlation coefficients, how strong the items correlate together.
Right.
But what it turns out to be is a beautiful way to collapse large sets of variables into meaningful clusters that you can use to explain the larger data set without having to use every variable, right?
So yeah.
So in this case, just to give examples, we've used it both for survey data and in this particular study, and I'll show you how it was used and what it means. And then the final part that you asked about was the good old MANOVA. And I'm sure most of you have been exposed to probably ANOVA, which is analysis of variance. MANOVA is the multivariate case when you have more than one dependent measure. So different set of statistical assumptions to be checked, similar but different. And it allows you to test the significance of differences of independent variables on a set of dependent variables in this case.
So they may have not had this stat courses in here yet, or may never will, because many of them are master's level students in here. Although I'll be sending the tape to my doctoral students who will know about MANOVAs. I will mention my first job at West Virginia, Ben Bailey's told me when I was doing exploratory factor analyses on all my research, I was creating the scale, social constructivism and active learning environment scale. Then I was creating the CACTELs, computer, what was it? Now I'm blanking on it. Computer activity questionnaire for thinking and learning skills of the 1990s, the CACTELs or something like that. And then, I created the Index of Writing Awareness, the IWA, and all this stuff. And he goes, exploratory factor, no, more of the Southern accent, 'cause he's from West by God. Factor analysis, that's voodoo statistics. It's voodoo, take a voodoo doll and stick a pin in it. So Ben taught statistics, but he got his degree at the University of Florida from Arthur Coombs, the humanist. And, he was a kind of a humanistic psychologist / statistician. He was a really interesting guy. He had his own take on things, but he didn't really trust exploratory factor. What you're doing, you have a whole set of variables, so items, like they said, 30, 35 items in a survey, and you're validating the subscales that you have. So in my scale, I was looking at social constructivist learning environments, and some items related to meaningfulness and relevancy, some related to collaborative teaming, some related to the use of prior knowledge, some, we had different subscales and negotiation of meaning, that we were able to flesh out by running the factor analyses. And
to add to that, Kurt, the beautiful thing in my mind, and I use EFA quite often to start with my skill development work. That's not to say I don't use its sister CFA when the theory gets stronger and I know the model better. But the beauty of CFA or EFA in my mind is that the mathematics of how it optimizes those factors, those subscales, often leads to very meaningful chunks of data, right?
Yeah.
And I just think it's beautiful that mathematics can get qualitative data and make it make sense.
Yeah.
That's just a beautiful thing. So.
Yep. Yeah, it is. I'm a former accountant, so I like data.
Yeah.
And I just I was, early on, but I will say, early in a career, do not develop scales. Do not do what I did. If it doesn't,
it's very taxing and time intensive, and you need large data sets. And I've made a career out of this. I've spent the time on it. It's very taxing.
Yeah, it takes, and if you have to do multiple samples, if you have to validate it, if you have to change a lot of items to get it better scaled, that all takes time. And in a 10-year clock, we're going for 10-year, you don't have the luxury of a lot of time at your disposal. However, once you have a scale that's been developed and validated and is reliable, you can run a whole lot of studies off of it and lead towards 10-year or whatever. But anyway.
Yeah, it's one of those tough things to balance that. But, the important thing is that you always keep in mind that it's about providing evidence of validity and reliability for a specific population. And, nothing's perfect, so it involves a lot of design and making constraint decisions and stuff like that. So you're always balancing kind of what the statistics are telling you with the value of the item and the content, and you have to make these tough choices. It's really good design in practice, right? So.
Yeah. Well, Albert, lead us into your data, my friend.
Yeah. I don't want us to talk EFA all day because I could do that for all day. But this study is the most recent one that we have published. It's in press right now in that journal that I mentioned. And we labeled it an exploratory job announcement analysis. Now, Florence and I have kind of refined what job announcement analysis looks like. We've even done text mining, kind of the AI learning analytics thing with it. But in this case, we labeled it exploratory job announcement analysis because we used exploratory factor analysis to collapse those list of knowledge, skill, and ability statements into meaningful clusters. Now, let me go ahead and push forward because I think this is the depth part that you probably need to hear. So this is my agenda. I'll just dive in because I don't want to take too much more of your time. As a profession, I think we could all agree that ID is this dynamic, complex, ever-evolving, environment where our job roles are shaped not only by technology, but the complexity of our context, which I mean like, healthcare or higher ed or whatever it might be. You couple that with business goals and these diverse learning environments that we have now, and you have a pretty wicked job. It's a wicked problem, right? So we feel that we wanted to know in depth what the actual competencies of these people are to refresh our prior works. But in this case, we intentionally looked at people with the role of instructional designer. The prior studies could have said curriculum designer, manager, or whatever, but this search resulted in titles that were associated very strongly with instructional design. So this slide is actually pretty important, and I made a promise to Kurt that I'd talk about this, but where do things like the PMP or CPAs, Kurt was an accountant, or professional engineers, or any of those professional industry vendor certifications, where do they come from? How do we identify the competencies that are associated with those exams and whatever else they make you do, like performance output or whatever, like the CPLP, or for example, from ATD? This is what we're interested in at large. How do you identify, summarize, and validate competencies associated with a particular profession while accounting for variability across contexts, higher ed, healthcare, government, whatever. So we've spent a good amount of time trying to figure out what tools or methodological approaches are appropriate for this. So I've given you the sample. I think I listed 10 journal articles that we've done over the years, but those were only a sampling of what can be done to try and get at these competencies and make sense of this world. So other things you can do besides job announcement analysis, which is the focus of this paper, is the Delphi method. The Delphi method is kind of a survey-based method, anonymous, confidential type data being collected from participants geographically dispersed. And in the first round of the survey, it's open-ended. Then you perform some rigorous type of analysis to code those data into close-ended items for round 2 of the survey. And then in round 3 of the survey, you show what they rated the first time along with the group indices, including the interquartile range and the mean and standard deviation. And you define those things for people who aren't stats experts. And you try to validate that way. You don't need super large samples for it, but it's one approach. You can survey approach, which is one that I've talked to you about already. We've done in-depth interviews. You can do work products. You can do observation. And these are all things that we've been looking at UF to try and answer our research questions. So why job announcement analysis is a pretty cool tool for this is that it presents usually the most highly desired skills that these organizations are looking for. Think about it. If you're an HR professional and you're in charge of writing that job announcement, or you're the manager and you're writing that job announcement, you're not going to put the stuff that you don't care about. You're going to put the stuff that matters, right? But that also represents the biggest limitation to this method, is that not all of these job announcements are created equally, right? So some of them are super long and super detailed, and some of them are like a paragraph, right? So you got to try to work with the best and make the most sense out of these volumes of data that you can. Now, the cool thing about this study in particular and this approach is that it's very much mixed method, as Tony Anwe-Bouzy would approach it, right? That guy does qualitative analysis and then rates it and then turns around, does a confirmatory factor analysis, then runs it through ANOVAs, and he does all sorts of wicked stuff. In this case, we just took qualitative data, which is the job announcements themselves, coded the absence or presence of those knowledge, skill, and ability statements, and then we performed a quantitative method known as exploratory factor analysis, which we just discussed, to make sense of the data in a more meaningful way. So about a decade ago, the definition of our field was updated by Melinda and a few others. This is a variation of that definition and visual they provided. They use the words creating, using, and managing. Now, before it was based on the 1994 AECT definition, which was like analysis, design, development, very ADDIE oriented, right? This definition kind of encapsulated the notion of like creation to include analysis and design in the same category, if you will. What we did was, over the years, those knowledge, skill, and ability statements that we kind of created were revised and iterated on and added to and subtracted from study to study. This was our guiding framework, though.
So they read that in week 2. They read Melinda in week 2 or so.
Okay, so you guys know what I'm talking about.
Week 1, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Good, beautiful. So they're working on a new one. I don't know who's the lead on that new definition that they came out with. The definition is out. It's okay, but you know, I don't know who's doing the new book. So this is the baseline of what we use to inspire the knowledge, skill, and ability statements that came out. And you might ask, well, why KSAs? Why knowledge, skill, and ability statements? We did that on purpose. KSAs are used for professional licensure and certification exams. So we use this as kind of a baseline for what we did. And we use a triangle to represent this because, okay, think of something like multimedia production. You need to know what HTML is, and you need to know, like, you know, the different tags and stuff like that to have the skill of being able to put together a reasonable website, right? So knowledge is built on by skills, which is built on by the ability, which is like the observable behavior that you have associated with the use of that knowledge and skills and performing those processes and using those resources to accomplish your goal. So that's where, you know, we try to ground what we do in some model or something. It's very theory oriented to do it that way. It's better. So we use this conceptual framework to guide our work. Now, what did it look like? We had data collection from multiple job announcement platforms. We systematically coded the data with 2 raters. We performed our data analysis, and I gotta move the thing here. Structural topical modeling approach was actually, this might have been a mistake that I used that slide. I'm sorry, that was from the learning analytics part that I told you about. Let me move forward. Okay, so we extracted the data source, the data, if you will. The individual unit of analysis was a job announcement. We extracted from Glassdoor, Munster, and Indeed. Those are probably the biggest platforms right now that aggregate job announcements. We only did it for 1 month, and we found 10,030 unique job announcements. Now, when we first started, we found like thousands of redundant items that we had to filter and go through manually and sort and stuff like that.
Wait, Albert, you said 10,000. That says 1,000 here.
Oh, 1,030. I'm sorry. I blanked on that. My bad. Sorry. It's getting late. Junior moment, right? So anyway, 1,030 job announcements collected in 1 month after removing duplicates, and those were our data for this study. We extracted as much descriptive information we could from these announcements themselves, including the company name, work locations, the educational requirements, the context. We used a standardized industry classification scale to standardize what industry each of these announcements came from. And then, of course, we had our very long list of KSA statements that was modified again and refreshed for this new data set. Here are
wait. Can you answer? Be honest. How many codes on average per job announcement? And if it's 10, that means you guys coded 10,000 things. 10,000 things takes a heck of a long time.
This took 4 months to code. But with
4 months to code of maybe 20 hours a week, or tell me you got graduate students to help you out there. You were not doing all 10,000 codes.
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. Yes, grad students helped us. That is who the lead author is and the second author. You know, I'll be honest, Kurt, I'm at a stage where I don't care if I have another pub, so I give the authorship to the people who do the work. And
right, I agree. Yeah, but people, yeah.
So yeah, it's laborious. This is a manual process. You can do some of it with keyword search, but you still have to read those statements carefully to make sure you map it. And then there's also inter-rater reliability issues. We did samples to train and calibrate and get to a point where we had strong inter-rater agreement when we were coding these announcements. Now, keep in mind, the KSA set that I had came from that 2015 study, was our last update. But just to make the point, it was 80 items for knowledge, 43 items for skills, and 62 items for abilities. Multiply that by the 1,030 job announcements, and you see this was a serious job. It took a lot of manual coding and a lot of calibration, discussion, open coding, recoding, and calibrating until that was done with reliability. Okay, so I just wanted to show the descriptives here. You can see that, no surprise, California was the biggest, Texas, Florida. That's also the largest state, the second largest state, and the third largest state in the nation. It used to be New York in third place, but Florida took that about 5 years ago. And then you can see, again, that bachelor's degree point that I made, you know, most of them are looking for bachelor's degrees. They don't care about the master's or, you know, doctorate. We had 2 that specified doctorate. You know what I'm saying? They're not interested. It's that whole chicken and the egg thing. Where do you get the experience? Where do you get the education? What comes first, right? So, and then professional context, you can look in the full paper to find out what these classifications mean. We only show those with 5% or greater here, but professional, scientific, and technical services would be inclusive of like Amazon hiring a ID, right? So, and then I think consultation services also fell under that. So that would be like, you know, oh God, you know, like a professional consultation ID company doing work for you as well. So there you go. Now, this is where it gets interesting, or at least from my perspective. Our intentions, Kurt, were not originally to do a factor analysis on this. Originally, we were just going to do this descriptively and report it like we did in this study here, this King and Ritzhaupt. But then we started looking at it and we're like, this is too much information. And how are we going to explain this and make sense of it? And we were like, well, you know what? This is a data reduction problem. Now, SPSS, which is, you know, a stat software program, will do factor analysis for ordinal, interval, you know, continuous data. But it is not designed for dichotomously scored data because you need the tetrachoric correlation tables. I had to learn M+ for doing this. I've used M+ for SEM models like path analysis, but I had never used it for dichotomously scored exploratory factor analysis. So that was like a cool thing that I got to learn, and I ran those models. And those 80 items reduced down to 6 factors, 43 items reduced to 5 factors, and 62 items reduced to 6 factors. So that is what it resulted in. Now, let me show you what these factors are and explain a little bit of the stuff that I guess Kurt and I were talking about before we got into this presentation. The first thing to note is that these labels are kind of assembled based on how those items clustered together. We looked at the essence of those items, whether they were meaningful, whether we had to drop anything and all that. And I think we only dropped a few just because of cross-loading. But these are how they clustered together. And if you remember, I said, like, it's beautiful how exploratory factor analysis uses these mathematical optimization methods through linear algebra to meaningfully chunk your data, right? And that's what happened here. So knowledge of video and audio authoring, productivity software, production development methodologies, digital literacies and principles, learning theory and web development, online blended and traditional learning. These were the knowledge factors that we were able to extract from, I think, those 80 variables that we had identified in our coding. You'll note I provide the mean there, which is really, since this is dichotomously scored data, you're talking about a response frequency, right? A percentage. So you can see that these weren't like vastly observed across these, but they still managed to load into meaningful factors. The most highly observed was knowledge of productivity software. You know, a lot of the job announcements said you have to be proficient in Microsoft Office, PowerPoint, Word, Excel, maybe a database package. A lot of them mentioned video and audio authoring tools from the Adobe suite, or generic Camtasia or something like that. And then a lot of them mentioned design and knowledge of online blended and traditional learning formats. So there's one word that's there that I'm sure Kurt will call me out on to define, and that's an eigenvalue. That eigenvalue, just to describe it, it's actually a very sophisticated composite variable to get at. It uses a whole lot of wicked linear algebra to get there, but it represents kind of the strength of the factor, if you will. And it goes from greatest to least. And there's this rule of thumb that you should look at ones that are greater than 1, but that's bogus. It depends on communalities and all these other factors that are associated with this. Ultimately, what matters in doing this type of analysis is making sure there's parsimony and a simple structure in the pattern matrix that you extract. So an eigenvalue kind of tells you that proportion of variability explained by that individual factor. So then, then we report, just to show the cohesion among these variables, if you will, the correlation matrices. This is straight up Pearson correlation coefficients reported in a matrix. Like you'll note that the strongest correlation is actually between knowledge of production development and methodologies with video and audio authoring. I think you could probably make a tenable justification as to why that relationship might exist, and it seems plausible, right? So that's what EFA is about. EFA is not so much about confirming and testing a hypothesis as it is about exploring and making sense of your data. So our skills domain resulted in 5 meaningful factors, and the one that I always remind people of, particularly, sometimes you come across the arrogant student that is a know-it-all or something, and you're like, listen, dude, you really need to change your attitude about how you work with people, right? If you're not a team player and you can't walk and talk and chew gum and make people feel comfortable around you, you're not going to be able to survive in this profession, right? So that's a tough conversation to have about shaping dispositions, which is really hard to do because it means changing behavior. But soft skills is the most highly rated observable thing in these job announcements. You have to work with a lot of people. You have to work with subject matter experts who are faculty. Some are very invested in their teaching. Others might be prima donnas and not care. You have to work with graphic designers and programmers who don't know anything about learning theory or what you do and whatever. So then if you look, the next highest skill observed was like those multimedia production skills. Depending on what type of shop you end up in, you may end up being a jack of all trades. You might be the developer and the designer. Depends on the organization, the size, the scope, the mission, etc. Anyway, these are the items that we observed for skills. Here's our correlation coefficients again. As you can see, some are strongly related. I didn't mention this before. The asterisk with 2 by it, the 2 asterisks are representative of 0.01 significance, and the 1 asterisk is 0.05, which is standard APA convention, right? So then we have our ability domain. Now, this one is, again, it makes the point about, the difficulty that Kurt and I probably face in training the next generation of IDs too, is that you've got to be able to collaborate with these diverse stakeholders. Look at that, and think about those other percentages that weren't really observed as heavily. But look at that one, observed at 50% across those job announcements, right? So you got to be able to, work with people. And it reminds me of that old saying, what you say, what you do, and then how you made someone feel is what matters. I think it was like Maya Angelou or something. You got to make people feel good about their interaction with you because they'll remember, how they felt after an engagement with you. They got to feel good about it. Other things to note, ability to use feedback in design. You need a thick skin for this business. Your first iteration at a product or an instructional solution may get scathing remarks from your subject matter experts or the learners for that matter. So you got to be able to pivot and work with what you have to make it better. Work in multiple projects, right? IDs that I talk to in higher ed here, because they're who I have most accessible to me, they're on about 6 or 7 course development projects any given time of the year. That's a lot to manage. You have to be able to pivot. Applying ethical instructional design procedures to meet goals, right? We use the word ethical there because ethical items actually collapsed under there. That's things like knowing about copyright, knowing about plagiarism, knowing about what you can and can't do with resources, open domain and stuff like that. And, you know, then design and deliver learning experiences and serve on multiple roles and adapt, right? Again, that's the narrative we're trying to tell with the data that we've observed and how we've analyzed it. So again, correlation matrix, you'll notice that there's more cohesiveness in terms of the significances, even though they're not like super strong correlations, they're significant and strong enough to show there's cohesion in this data set. So I don't. Did I mute myself?
I muted you by mistake. I was trying to unmute mine.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I was like, a little thing popped up. So I was like, oh my God, have I been talking to myself these past 30 minutes? You know?
No, just for a second, they're not.
Get the hell out of me.
I muted you because you're talking to me. I had a question going back. I've forgotten what the main theme was. Was the search for instructional design, or what was the job role in general that you were searching for?
We intentionally looked for instructional designers this time, and there's intentionality with that. As you know, Florence indicated that she's involved on the board of Is Pmp, and then as a consequence, I guess, of the work that I do inherently, I got invited to do research for them. This project was inspired by that collaboration. With that said, Is Pmp is getting to the point after they finish this newest refresh of the instructor validation, they're getting ready to refresh ID again. And that's why we did this work.
Okay, so in the next week, when Merve presents, she'll be covering 5 different job types. Instructional designer is one of those, right, Merve?
Yes, Dr. Bonk, we have 5 different instructional design related fields, including educational technology, instructional systems technology, learning design, instructional systems design, and one more. So
educational tech specialist, maybe,
yes.
or something.
Learning experience, instructional design, instructional systems design, educational technology, instructional technology.
You know, it's funny that you bring up these different titles because in many ways, the same situation that exists for the fact that we don't have a universal label for our domain and field is represented in the confusion about what these different job roles are. Now, I'm not to say there aren't some real documented differences between somebody who takes a learning experience design approach, which is more of like using those human-centered development methodologies and agile design and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, a lot of these folks are doing the same thing, you know, and that's what we're discovering, at least. The one that's newest to the block well, not new, because actually Simon defined it a generation ago, but the newer one that I think we need to pay attention to, given that IEEE has an interest in it, is learning engineering. I've actually started looking to see if I could find job announcements with the words learning engineer, and I have only seen a handful of them thus far. If you do like a quick search, like in Indeed or something like that for learning engineer, you end up finding machine learning engineer, which is not what you wanted, right? So the reason I bring this up though is IEEE is, I mean, just magnitudes larger than we are as a professional society, association, whatever you want to call us. I bet if you added up the composition of ATD, ISPI, ACT, AACE, which I'm just giving like a vocabulary of all these professional societies, that they wouldn't even have the same size is IEEE, which has more than 80,000 members worldwide. So they're now dabbling in this notion of learning engineering. They've come up with these like domain models, and they're working on competencies. I've attended a few of the meetings. I read what they write, but I think we need to pay attention to that conversation and be active at that discussion, because if we're not careful, we'll lose our professional identity and our scope, right? So anyway, that was a tangent. I'm sorry.
No. That was the same concern we had when learning science evolved, and same concern maybe when information science. There's different disciplines that have taken small pieces from the field of instructional technology over the past 30 years, and the instructional design as a whole has not been taken. One other aspect of the field that's not been taken is online learning, online and distance learning. There's no other discipline that trains people to be an online learning manager of distance ed programs or stuff like that.
For now, COVID certainly shook us up on that one, so you never know. I just feel like if we're not careful, we're all gonna get de-identified, and the essence of who we are and what we do is going to be masked by a bigger organization, and we'll be in their shadow. To how, you mentioned learning sciences. I get so irritated when I'm at one of those NSF panels and they're like, oh, well, that's an instructional design person, not a learning scientist. It's just like, dude, do you even know what they write and read and how it differs and how it overlaps? I mean, we're all talking about the same thing, just with different philosophical perspectives, right? So it drives me nuts, but
yeah, it drives me nuts too. When learning science tends to be very exclusive, and I used to be in the field. And, I was over there in ed psych and learning science, but the one joke was that Punya Mishra, my good friend, was the only one who wasn't a learning science person on a symposium at AERA of learning science people. He's the only paper that they didn't talk about, and they didn't read, anyhow, learning science tends to say, it's one of those things where, if you're not recognized as in the field, they just ignore you.
Well, and I could go back to that original point that I made about how titles necessarily don't matter, but think about I'm a computer programmer, I'm a software engineer, you're doing the same damn thing. It's just a newer label, right? So, I mean, there's definitely some subtle differences, but I mean, it's just this prestige notion that we're using to qualify who we are can make a difference. So,
yeah. Well, before this class started this semester, I used to be in that department. I tried teaching a course that I designed 30 years ago, taught for 20 some years, and I wanted to go back and teach it. And the learning science people tell me I'm not qualified to teach it. And here's the course I designed and created. So that's how bad it's gotten, so.
It's back to turf wars and whatever. So,
yeah.
Okay, let me make some limitations here. I am a strong believer that I don't care. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. How solid your research design was or your measures were or whatever, it's got limitations, and it's your job as a scholar to enumerate those limitations and wrap that into the meaning of your discussion for the reader. So I always usually start my discussion actually with stating the limitations and delimitations of the study and state what we found in light of that, One obvious one is we did this in the US. We don't deny that. We used only 3 job boards, but I actually don't feel as bad about that because they're the biggest job boards out there, right? They aggregate across industries and sectors, basically pulling job announcements from everybody's website, right? One clear limitation, but this is more of a temporal thing, and that notion again of periodically updating and checking and whatever. We only took 1 month, but look how many jobs we found this time. The first time we did this, we spent 3 months and only found 250 jobs. Now we found 1,060 unique jobs in a matter of a month.
Wow.
So Again, that's anecdotal evidence. I don't have controls or whatever, but certainly something's happening out there. The biggest limitation to the method itself is that issue of quality in the job announcements. Some are very descriptive, very detailed, and others are not. You have to make do with what you have and try to make sense of what was written in those announcements. And again, this EFA wasn't about, the traditional notion of how EFA is used in our field. EFA is traditionally used as a first step to survey validation. This use of EFA was strictly about data reduction and meaningfully loading content together. So not exactly the same thing, so we didn't mind the cross loadings. Okay, so why does this matter? I talked about some of it at the beginning, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts if you want to chime in. But we see a few people that this matters for. Obviously, the professionals and the students. You got to know what you got to be current on. You got to know what your gaps and limitations are to penetrate a field if you're a novice or whatever. So that's clear. Employers who hire ID professionals. How do you write your job announcements? What do you expect from your graduates? What can they do? What can't they do? How should I structure my teams? How should workflow be arranged in my organization to optimize and meet business goals? That's a very obvious one too. EdTech programs and faculties. Back to Florence and I. What do we teach? How do we do it? What's the best? That's what we want to know in EdTech programs and stuff. And then the biggest thing that I think that should matter to a lot of our societies is that they're the ones that guide the literature, the discourse, the conferences, the exchange of ideas. And if you look at like CPAs or the bar exam or, professional engineers, it's the professionals in the field, sometimes governed by litigation, like a bar exam or whatever. But, they're the ones that decide what the benchmark is to enter the profession, right? So we have to sort this out eventually in our field. And my biggest concern, moving forward about that is we can't even agree in this field about what our title is. How are we going to agree on how and what and where and when we should be teaching and what we should be teaching, such that at least employers have confidence in what we're doing as a body of knowledge, right? That's why this matters.
I'll add 4 to that, and that the Gates Foundation is very interested in this. Gates Foundation has funded stuff like this, and the Gates Foundation might allocate money for once this kind of findings will help them determine how to allocate money. So number 1. Number 2, online news like the Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed feature certain things. And this is a type of study that can get featured within online news and get highlighted and get the dissemination that can happen is a lot quicker via online news than waiting to get in a journal or get into a book chapter and all that. So this is critical, this kind of study, to get into those online news. You need to know who you need to contact the writers of Inside Higher Ed.
Just to piggyback off that, I've been interviewed by both Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle about this body of knowledge. So yeah, cited and interviewed already by them because we do this work.
Yeah, Joshua Kim at Chronicle of Higher Ed does his daily, as you know. Then the third one would be conference planners. They're looking for what are the themes, what are the topics, what are the things that they should be including in the suite of items in the conference itself. And then the fourth one was policymakers who are allocating money and coming up with what reports and plans and so forth. So political side of things. So those are 4 important prongs that it sounds like you're addressing anyway. You're doing
that's a good point, Kurt, especially about the policymakers and governments and allocations. I mean, just to be clear, we don't even have a keyword that is of essence to us in the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Outlook Handbook. The 2 closest things are training specialist and instructional coordinator. The person who develops materials and uses theory and develops those materials and all that, and innovates in environments and stuff like that isn't necessarily captured by that current indexing system. So great points. You know, we're still an emerging field. We've been around for a long time though. It's time that we get a little more grounded, I think. That's my takeaway, at least.
I think yep.
Oh, go ahead.
I think you have about 1 or 2 slides left, and we want to get a couple questions from everybody before we end.
This is, I think, my last slide. Yeah, this is my last slide. Okay. So I'll just close out by saying there are not just one way to cook this, right? You can find competencies summarized and validate in many ways. We didn't do this in this work, but we could have if we could fit it in a journal article, which is like impossible. But we wanted to look at differences across those contexts as well, and based on educational requirements and stuff like that, doing like some type of ANOVA work based on those clusters. And then certainly this is US centric here. So you got to be accommodating to other places. I just saw that our instrument that I had developed with Florence was adopted and deployed by INILDA in the Caribbean and Latin American countries by a sample of 100, which, you know, is pretty good for, you know, emerging countries like that. So, you know, I think we're on to something important here, and we're contributing in a meaningful way. So I'll shut up now.
Well, I think another area that's important is those developing bachelor's programs, because, you know, that's where it's at, is bachelor's programs. And anyone have a comment, question? Yeah, Merve.
Thank you so much, Albert, again for this wonderful project sharing with us. At the beginning of the session, you said that your initial motivation was to improve your teaching, to provide better teaching curriculum to your students. And I'm just wondering, after finalizing this project, what kind of updates, what kind of changes have you done in your department?
Well, I can give you a lot of examples for that. Okay, so for example, something as simple as what resources do we need from our administrators or for our students to purchase to be able to offer a current, relevant, robust curriculum? So, you know, at one point in time, like the go-to was like something like authorware, but now we have all these widgets and LMSs and WordPress and all this stuff that we gotta finagle with. So knowing what to put in the environment, the ecosystem, knowing how to structure the assignments. Think about it, like, do you do standalone things? It's not often that we always work alone, but at the same time, the benefit of giving individual assignments is that everybody has to meet the same benchmark. So how do you blend both those real world projects as well as those individual competencies that the students have to demonstrate in order to do this work, you know, at that level? And then, you know, I'd like to believe, I mean, I know I'm not the best teacher in the world. I know that for a fact, but I do take it seriously and I try, you know, and I am reflective. If I make a mistake, I reflect on it. I think about what I did wrong and I try something different. You know, every new class that you teach is like an experiment. You know, you throw out what doesn't work and you take what worked and you hope that it works with the new batch of students and their interests, and it's just ongoing. It's almost like a calculus limit, which is like a negative way to look at it almost. But, you know, teaching perfection is not attainable. You know, you have to keep approaching it, but you'll never get there. So that's where I'm at with it.
Wonderful. And a very tiny follow-up question. Since the expectations from the graduates of ID field have been changing, do you also update or change any of the faculty hiring factors, criterion? I mean, beside teaching, service, and research, do you also consider thinking about some practical, like audio editing, you said in the table, this kind of competencies? Do you also wait from the prospective faculties? Or
I don't think I understand the question. I maybe you could rephrase it for me. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
No, it was a very long question.
Okay.
The point is, since the graduate students, the expectations of the students have been changing, do you also anticipate or change any kind of faculty competencies which will teach or research in the ID fields?
Oh, okay. So kind of that goes along with that notion of those periodic updates and refreshing your courses. You know, in some ways, I almost beat myself over the head for not choosing to major in computer science or math or something like that, where I could just basically teach the same damn thing for 30 years and call it a day. But, you know, that's not how our field works. We're dynamic, we're ever changing, we're influenced by a lot of factors, and we're emergent. So, you know, we have to face a much more complex environment. You have to periodically update, otherwise you're irrelevant. And I know a lot of faculty members get comfortable and whatever, and they think this works, and then they do it over and over again, or they just teach design, for example, and never talk about like development or how it connects and where the rubber meets the road. You have to update. You have to.
Thank you.
No
So
problem.
Halima had to
I answered
leave.
your question.
Halima had to leave, and but she left a question. She's going to watch the recording. So it's, I think I know the answer to this one. She asked about the knowledge domain and why learning theories and web development end up in the same category or subcategory grouped together when they're kind of distantly related. If you know, and so maybe you could add.
That is not the most thematic structure, but those items really did load, and we actually provide the pattern matrices and the descriptives in the full paper, so you can see how they loaded.
And maybe if you had a lot of knowledge variables, you could actually have subcategories within the knowledge domain, some that relate to technology skills, some that relate to theories.
Right. I mean, again, it's all about trying to convey lots and lots of moving parts at once. That was our goal. But EFA was the right tool, I think, in this case. And it was kind of fun. You know, I learned a new technique with dichotomously scored data, and we were able to make sense of those factors, even though not all of them were highly observed. There were, for the most part, I think you would agree that a lot of those factors were meaningful. One in particular did not make that much sense, but you know, you work with what the data tells you, right? That's the way EFA works.
Yep. Maina gets the last question for tonight. Maina, you want to read off your question there?
Yeah, so thank you for the wonderful talk. Based on your recent studies findings, if a university is going to create a new master program, do you have any suggestions on which kind of courses that we should provide to prepare students to the job market? I know in our field we teach a lot of design. Do you think the development kind of courses are also needed, or what do you think the proportion of these different courses?
I think generic course topics about emerging technologies and emerging development are appropriate. I'm not going to lie. I teach a web development course. We develop, and I roll them through kind of the dirt in this course. We start off with WordPress, which represents all the qualities of what we're going to learn in the class. Then I draw them through hand-based straight up coding in HTML and CSS. Then we jump into JavaScript, and then we jump into libraries like, you know, things like jQuery or, you know, Bootstrap or whatever, which made life a lot easier for us. Then we go into PHP and MySQL and Ajax. I mean, we cover that stuff in our program, but not all programs are the same, you know, and nor should we be. I mean, I do think we need some sort of an agreed upon label eventually, but I think the fact that, you know, IU is known for one thing and UF is known for another and FSU is known for another thing, those are good things. You know, that gives students options and choice and whatever. I would say if I were considering what would go into a robust undergrad or master's program, keep in mind, you can actually do more with a bachelor's degree than you can with a master's. A master's degree typically, you know, max is 36 credit hours. The bachelor's beyond freshman, sophomore year is up to 60 credit hours that you get to work with. That was what enticed me to go down that direction in the first place. I guess the moral of the story is, I think everything matters, but you have to choose what you want to be known for as an institution and where you want to place your resources, your time, your students, and whatever. I would say the direction that UF has decided to focus on, based on our new set of hires in particular, is connecting a lot of traditional ID work to development work to full circle. I mean, I was critiquing that learning engineering body of knowledge, but in many ways we're doing some of that stuff. We hired learning analytics specialists and AI specialists, people with degrees in CS, and they're working in our context. I think what is most valuable is a strong foundation, and then in the final year, like a capstone project or a studio, or however you structure it in your program, where the rubber meets the road. Eventually they have to be able to create something though. You can't just talk about it. You got to do it too.
Yeah, I really appreciate your answers. But I have one question. So when you have students from our field, if you teach them the development part, for example, you teach them PHP or SQL, I know because I have already reviewed the courses in your university. There are some very techy courses. Did you think the students will feel scared, or how do they feel comfortable with that kind of stuff?
That is a harsh reality. And since I'm the one that has to teach a lot of those tough courses, you know, I get raked over coals sometimes with certain students with teaching evals. You know, programming's hard. Let's face it. If everybody could do it, like we'd have like these people making, you know, $85,000 a year with a bachelor's and whatever. But the fact is, not everybody has that mindset as easily, and it takes some people a little more time, and you have to find new ways to teach them. That is a real situation that you have to consider. I've always tried to be honest with my students and set the expectation. And of course, we end up breaking rules, and I accept late assignments and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they've got to be able to walk, talk, and chew gum. And I'm more interested in that class in particular, and in the CS education track. I'm not interested in knowing that, you know, a Java statement ends with a semicolon. I'm interested in your application of problem solving, critical thinking, logic, you know, because that's the stuff that matters across all of this, development or design. You know, you need to be able to use that thing on your shoulders, right? So that's the way I see it.
So do you think faculty members should be more like you, or more like dumb faculty like me? I would say it another way. Some faculty, some students are very savvy with technology, like yourself, and some students that run through our program are very good at theory and technologies. There are very few of them. Some faculty, and the same with faculty, some are production people, but I have a sense that people like you are more valuable to an ed tech program than people like me, because anybody can learn theory, but not anyone can learn about media and production.
Well, I can't say that, Kurt, because you also have to be able to see the big picture. And I've always saw you as somebody who's more of a strategic thinker and, you know, the big picture. At the end of the day, keep in mind, like, think about that strategic pyramid that's published in like general education business books, where you have the operational level, the tactical level, and the strategic level. At the end of the day, what I'm teaching sometimes is at the operational level. That's where the rubber meets the road. By the way, that's the least well paid and most replaceable part of the job. The people at the tactical level are the managers that kind of take the strategic vision and turn it into day-to-day operations. And then at the top, you have the people who are setting the vision. Kurt, you've always struck me as the vision setter, and I'm not quite that way yet. But, you know, you got to remember, I also decided early on to major in computer science. And I've always had that interest in how you design and develop and how those two connect. So, you know, and I'm more of a traditionalist in that regard. I don't do, like Elizabeth Bowling's journal. You know, I've never written a piece like that. I do more of the Ritchie and Klein, you know, design development cases and stuff like that. I guess I have more of a positivist orientation to myself, I'll admit it. But that's the whole point of having a faculty. not all of us are good at everything. And what happens is, I mean, the good programs, they look at the strengths of each other, they work at it, and they put their aces in their places. And that's what leads to good, solid, award-winning type programs or whatever, in my mind.
You're looking at Mena and Merve, who have a couple articles. Yesterday, Mena had one on design with Elizabeth Bowling, and Merve and I and Mena have an article in Contemporary Ed Tech on design. So yeah, a couple people here have been studying with her, and really influential lately. That area.
I love her original that first issue of that journal, actually, the International Design Cases Learning or whatever. And her descriptions of precedent and what design really is and stuff like that, I agree with all that. But like at the end of the day, when I put it all together and try to make sense of it and portray it to the world, I don't do it in the same fashion that her journal like kind of aspires to. You have different approaches, and we're not all the same, right? So, I mean, for that matter, what's the difference between the design development case that, Ritchie and Klein wrote about and a single iteration or multiple iterations of DBR, which, Tom writes about, and, the final product that you characterize for that journal? They're all related.
They're all related. And then you mentioned Tom Reeves, my colleague in crime from Georgia, was my guest in my other class this semester, Ask Tom Anything session. And so, Dr. Reguluth here at IU was the big picture person. And he and I have joined a special task force here for envisioning where the School of Ed is going. And I'm chairing that with Merve's help and Charan's help. We're going to have a meeting right after this talking about, so the School of Ed will be focusing on that. I'm curious, as a final comment, given you've been very tactical and operations oriented, on the side, is one of your goals to be, in the end, one who offers the big picture point of view or reflective point of view? And when do you see you taking on that role?
I think I'll get to there eventually. I don't see myself there yet. I've only done, I do always try to provide conceptual theoretical grounding to all of my work.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily do like the groundbreaking new CTML or, you know what I'm saying? That's just not who I am yet. Mm-hmm. That's not to say I won't get there. I might go down the more theoretical route. I might go down more of a leadership route. I don't know. But the one thing I will give my credit for is that I can see it, and make sense of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and try to understand how things are connected and stuff like that. And I think that goes along kind of with my pedigree. I have a business background meets technical background meets education. It's a little bit more, it's 3 different colleges, right? Very different approaches to the world. So
well, you are the Associate Director of Graduate Studies, but the leadership role there, and there'll be more such roles for you after you become a full professor in a few months. It's coming. It's in the process.
They make us wait till June here. Okay. All the other places and folks I know already got their announcement, but the Board of Trustees meets in June and has to pass their opinion on it, and it's not official till then. So.
Yeah, well, don't tell us the rumors yet. Then we shouldn't know. You can send me an email and tell me the rumor. Anyways, in your syllabus, page 14 or whatever, 22, there's a ton of articles listed that he just went through. He's introduced you. Albert's introduced all of them. So find during the next 2 weeks. It's really for next week. So this week read about ethics and maybe dabble in some of these. Next week get into Albert's articles. And you've heard about them, you've gotten excited about them, you've read some of it in the data. It's going to be really smooth for you to go in depth now and then blog on it and reflect on it. So I appreciate you coming in here, Albert, and I appreciate Florence as well. The two of you provide a lot of insights that we normally don't get in a class like this, to hear from the author before we have a chance to read them. What we didn't ask you is, which one would you really recommend? But no, we probably should hear all of them.
Well, I'll close and say thank you so much for listening to me blab for I don't even know how long now. But I hope it was somewhat interesting and that I offered some different perspective. If you ever see me at a conference, say hi. I'm a nice guy. Kurt can maybe attest to that. And I see one last question. Did your program include gamification or simulation courses? I haven't taught that course in quite some time because before we had a bajillion faculty, there was just 4 of us. But I was the person that authored the games and simulations for teaching and learning course at UF. And I just finished the paper, for Kurt's special issue on gamification. So yeah, like I said, where design meets development and how you make it happen, that's what excites me. So.
Well, thanks, Albert. Omida, since that's your question, I'll let you have the last word and have a final say, and we'll close to the cloud. So thanks, Albert. Omida?
No problem.
Yeah, he read my question already. So that was the question.
I wanted you to say something on tape, on the recording, so I'm going to pose this to the cloud.
Oh. Well, okay. I appreciate your insights. It's a really good presentation and impactful. I come to these classes usually as a listener. I don't take this class officially, but I learn a lot and I get inspired. I feel the power of these presentations and the team.
Well, thank
Dr. Bonk built a really big team, really nice team.
You're a part of a great program. You're in a amazing professor's class. I see, only good things in that environment. So
thank you.
Thank you very much, Kurt. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Charan, my vase, stay around here. We're going to put this